going live. We are live. Now, is it pronounced Moj? Moj, I believe, was the other alternative that Andy was giving me.
Yeah, I don't know how would you say it? How does it feel for you saying in Australia? I don't mind either one. So
Yeah, I guess just
what would you say?
going off the BBC shows that they syndicate here, sounds more like, comes across as more of a Moj, but that could be
Yeah, that's okay. I'm good with that. A lot of people say Moj, so it's probably 70-30
okay.
Moj. So that,
Well,
yeah, we'll go with that.
I'm
I
glad
honestly don't mind, honestly.
I'm glad I got the main dialect right then.
Yeah, well, Lady Christina's easier to say, isn't it? So
It definitely
it doesn't
is.
matter what side of the world you're on.
And so leading on to that, that's Lady Christina, which is seems to be a real theme of identity there in the show's called Makeup, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's kind of that double meaning, really. Andy, the director, will hopefully be joining us in a bit, obviously, because of the magic of technology, other side of the world, tech issues at the moment. But hopefully the old log out, log in should work again. But Andy will probably explain more about the show in terms of the double meaning of makeup. So obviously it's the makeup you see. But for most people, we've just had Halloween. It's a chance to make yourself up into something else and to be someone else, really, or to escape into someone different. But for this character, he's escaping away from his regular self. So we thought about the history of the character. That Andy had written it in a very specific time period in the UK. So with things that happen with the IRA and kind of bombings in Birmingham, and the character growing up in Birmingham, not being accepted by his dad. So the whole show really is a double meaning about the makeup is a way for the character of Chris, who is Lady Christina, but Chris to escape into this kind of drag character, and he has a few, not digs, but he has a few kind of lines in the show about how drag race is a new phenomenon, but how he remembers an older drag, a more kind of purer form of drag, which wasn't for fame and televised. It was actually kind of dingy, pokey pub theatres, and that's what he grew up with. So yeah, it's really a kind of escaping into the makeup, because every time he takes off his makeup as Chris, he doesn't like who he is. But when he has Lady Christina, who for him the character was born out of his dad throwing him out of his house when he was young, it was a way for him to escape what was happening to him. And the kind of key point of the play is that he is now 44. He's celebrating his 44th birthday, and he takes off his makeup for the first time and actually sees his dad in the mirror, which is, if anyone out there is is an adopted person, or doesn't live with their real parents, or their biological, I should say. Real sounds insulting, but your biological parents, or you've had any kind of that thing where you start to look like maybe the parent you didn't get on with, and people will constantly remind you and say, oh, you really look like your dad, or you really look like your mum. And if you didn't get on with your mum, and it reminds you of not a nice thing every time you think of your mum, it's quite a weird thing that people must have. So that's part of the thing. He sees his dad, and he has lines saying, why can't I see mum's face in the mirror? Why can't she be looking back at me? So it must be the worst thing, and a real reason to want to coat yourself in makeup and escape into a different character, if every time you take it off you look like the person most in the world that you really don't want to look like.
Almost like the person that you're quite deliberately trying to escape. So that's kind of the double meaning of makeup. There's we have this kind of, we have to be very careful with people kind of selling the players. It's not a drag show. It's not like you're going to see Drag Race live and it's going to be kind of cabaret or comedy, someone doing drag stand-up. It's almost kind of completely flipped. It's the bit of drag that you don't really see. Obviously, you see the televised, edited version, dramatized version on
TV, the kind of backstage of drag and all the kind of little kind of snips and arguments and quips they'll have with each other. But for this, as the character talking about the older school of drag, the play takes place in that setting. It's in a pub theatre. It's in a kind of dingy. It's a Sunday night, dingy Sunday night in a pub theatre in Wolverhampton, which is this kind of small city on the kind of suburbs of Birmingham, kind of northwest of Birmingham, and that's kind of where the character grew up. So he's kind of near his home, and he's doing. He's in a pub theatre, Sunday night drag. It's really, a few people in the audience, cabaret tables to make it look fuller than it is. And yeah, it's that kind of side of drag you don't really see. So the whole play is set in the dressing room. It's not set on the stage. So the audience are that kind of fourth wall, but kind of referred to a lot. It's a one-man show. So it's about 50 minutes, and it's, talking kind of not wink in a kind of panto way, but it's referring openly to the audience sometimes, and then but kind of drawing them in very intimately. But it's all set in the dressing room, so it's interesting.
One-man show thing of where they're just thinking out loud, and they just happen to be facing where the stage is.
Exactly, and it works really nicely. We found in a Fringe setting, we were lucky enough with everything that's been going on. Obviously, in Australia, there's been different kind of government have decided different types of lockdowns and restrictions and social distancing. But here, we were meant to do the Brighton Fringe, and the Brighton Fringe is the second main one after the Edinburgh Fringe, where it's in May time, and then usually it's a good run into to August for the Edinburgh Fringe. We were meant to do Brighton in the summer, but Brighton moved in a smaller capacity, rescheduled to September and October, which, along with the government guidelines at the time, we were allowed to do socially distanced performances, half the capacity in the audience. They had to wear masks, and it wouldn't work for 3-hour musicals and things. But for Fringe theatre, it actually seemed to work quite well. And for our type of show, it's a very intimate piece. So as the character, it was about being able to really articulate things without thinking I have to project it all, because it's meant to sound really natural. It's meant to really draw the audience in. So it worked really nicely for a Fringe show. And we were lucky enough, we got to do 4 socially distanced performances.
Okay, so
Brighton.
Those are actual live ones.
Yeah, in the beginning of October. So it was great to say we had a sellout, because we only had 15 people who were allowed to come. So I think we sold out the first night. What?
We had 2 sellouts.
2 sellouts, yeah, first night and last night, and the other nights were good numbers. But it worked really nicely. It was really nice to know that even if you had 6 people in the audience or 15 people in a small setting, that it's almost the perfect place for it to belong, because it's an intimate dressing room piece. It's talking to the mirror, and we have to think about how we angled the mirror, because he talks a lot to the mirror, which is on his table. So it's very basic, table, mirror. But being able to talk to himself in the mirror and talk to his dad, and then being able to kind of refer to the audience and make sure the mirror's not blocking the audience was interesting. And it's kind of actually not a one-person play. It's a 2-person play, because it's really a duologue. It's not a 50-minute monologue. It's talking to his dad, and his dad sometimes coming out, and him sometimes being his dad to the mirror. So it's quite a kind of wrestling of identity with the piece. You've got Lady Christina, Chris, and you've got the dad. Maybe a 3-person play. I don't know. Yeah,
it's a 3-hander with the economy of 1 person.
Yeah, and we got really nice reactions from the audience, being able to say, thinking about how identity is not just how you look at someone else. It's the multiple identities you might have within yourself, or the identities you've gone through in your life, and how certain people can bring back certain identities for yourself, ways you start to act based on memories you remember. So it was really interesting to do, and we were so grateful we got to do 4 performances in Brighton, and we also got to do 1 performance in London as well, where we did a Q&A
So that was the first ever premiere of the piece, and we got to do a nice Q&A with the audience, with Andy and I on stage afterwards being interviewed. And yeah, it's been good to do. It's been a real challenge, but we will be doing Edinburgh next year, and it was nice to know it works in an intimate setting. I think the Edinburgh seating for our venue next year at the Underbelly will be about 60. I think, is that right, Andy?
Yeah, about 60.
Yeah. By the way, Andy's in Edinburgh. I'm in London, so we're actually in 3 different countries right now.
This is
Andy. Yeah, so it's strange, and also we rehearsed remotely, which is something I'm sure Andy will come on to speak about. You know, we were. I think the last in-person rehearsal we had before Brighton, where Andy could come down to London, and we had a couple of we hired a studio space in late September. But before that, it was March or April. We'd rehearsed in a venue above a pub, and in Edinburgh, and in this nice community pub. And yeah, that was just before they announced the lockdown. And then I think we rehearsed for May, June, July, August. For about 6 months, we rehearsed remotely. So obviously, with the beauty of technology, I would send him clips, and he would say, "Try this bit of the script out. Send me a video." So I'd get up dressed into drag, and I've never done drag before, so it was really trying to learn. I've got a good friend of mine who does drag, so they gave me some kind of tutorials online, and I watched some videos. Tried to stay away from Drag Race, actually. I tried to kind of make sure I kind of stayed more towards the old kind of drag of the world of the play. And yeah, at the start, it literally was just maybe a bit of eyelashes and a bit of kind of eyeliner, and then slowly actually the character evolved with the makeup through the rehearsals. So the makeup would get better and better as I sent Andy more and more videos. Andy would also, we came up with some new lines which weren't even made for the original script through lockdown. Andy would say, "Oh, let's improvise the dressing room before the show," because obviously the play is set the play is set for the dressing room after his drag show finishes. So Andy would say, "Oh, let's try some like Lady Christina in the dressing room prepping for her stage show," and again, great for character development and for me, but also good to we got some extra lines, which is really, really good for the play.
And that ambient dialogue can be really good for setting the tone of a character.
Yeah,
especially in those early stages before you get to know them, and that then you can sort of subvert it, where you've got someone acting a certain way before the show, and then you see them in the come down afterwards.
Yeah, and I think we've got that kind of evolution on the YouTube channel, if I'm not wrong. Andy might be able to correct me, but I think we've got some of those kind of rehearsals and the kind of evolution of Lady Christina. So it's really nice for people who come along, because they can be part of the journey digitally if they want. You know, they can look as much as they want at the YouTube channel, and they can see the evolution of the character, which is really nice. But also as well, we'll have the Q&A, so then they should be able to, if they want, see the kind of reflections of the play as well. So we tried to think about maximizing our way over lockdown. We didn't want to just go, "Oh, okay, 2021 then." We wanted to, it's important I think for our mental health as well, and well-being and motivation as a writer and director and as an actor. It was good to be able to have that relationship with each other over lockdown, just for our health and to make sure we had something to focus on. And we didn't want to just wait for 2021. We thought, what can we do? And there's plenty with technology now. We couldn't even do 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And we try and look at that glass half full thing, which I think a lot of performers are trying to do. We go in, at least it's not live theatre, but at least we can get things online. We can film scenes. We can do remote readings on Zoom or Teams. We can do readings of plays. We can do performances of plays. And I think that was something we were really keen to do. And we didn't just film the rehearsals. We managed to film a short film version of the play, because over lockdown, when we were allowed in July in the UK to be back into venues, not to perform, but we were allowed safely in venues to be able to distance and film, because a film production could start again in the UK in early July.
we managed to get some funding to film a short film version. So actually, through lockdown, we managed to get some great prep footage to build the character more and to help draw audiences in more. But we also managed to have a longer rehearsal period as well, which is great. We managed to, our first thing would have been in May. So from March to May was short, but from March to September, October, and doing the film in kind of July, we had longer periods to develop the character. And we got a short film version out of it, which was really, really good, which doesn't give you the whole version of the play. It's almost like a elongated trailer to the play. So again, it works brilliantly. People could watch the short film and think, oh, I want to see the rest of the play now. And even we said everything happens for a reason. I think Andy you had some kind of hospital thing, didn't you? Which meant you wouldn't have been able to actually come down for the May performances.
Yeah, I ended up on what was meant to be our first performances. Shortly, about one day after that, had a bad case of appendicitis. So I would have probably been there for the first performances, but would have then ended up on a train in desperate need for a hospital somewhere on a very long journey. And then the second set of performances wouldn't have been able to do those. So yeah, from that point of view, lockdown has been weirdly beneficial to us.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things where it is sort of a matter of making the most of it. Here, I was going to do something at our Melbourne Comedy Festival, and then that got cancelled because that was going to be in April, and so yeah, I ended up just recording a lot of what I was going to do, and I've set that up for my show here as for Fringe instead. But it sounds like that you guys aren't just doing all pre-recorded, that there's going to be a live element as well?
Yeah. Oh, go on, Andy, actually, because I've just looked at the time. I should go. But hopefully I've blabbered on enough about the play so far. Andy, we just started by talking about the double meaning of makeup and a bit about identity and seeing the person you don't want to see in the mirror and things, but yeah, apologies, I have to go.
No, that's
part
all right.
of my other trying of hustling for work. I need to run a webinar with students, which I would usually be doing live in schools. So yeah, I have to prep that for 10 o'clock our time. What time is it there, by the way, Tom?
It is 20 to 9 in the evening. We're usually about 10 hours ahead of you guys,
11 hours.
But we also have daylight savings here, so that puts it ahead by one as well.
Yes, and we've got, is that kind of the equivalent of clocks going back or forward? Because we've had that as well, I think.
Yeah, it's an hour forward, so it should be 7 o'clock. Pretty much 20 to 8 at the moment.
Oh, but, right.
Yeah, it's 20 to 9 instead.
Yeah, ours went.
Yeah,
I think ours went back.
Opposite direction, because of course I suppose it's kind of
It's the hemisphere's been the other way as well. So it's coming into summer down here, so the days are getting longer.
Of course, yeah. So you're doing what we'll do when our clocks go forward in is it May? I don't know when they go forward, March or something.
Yeah, about that.
But ours have just gone back.
About April or so, I think, is when it.
Because we're going into winter. Yeah, this is like Game of Thrones. You're in like Westeros. We're north of the Wall. We're going into winter. It's horrible. It's if you want to quickly see before I go, Aussie audiences, like that is British weather. Look at that, lovely grey, raining. Oh, yep. Awful.
That looks about.
There we go. Right.
I was
right.
I was in London about 2 years ago in about September, and I think we got there just for the couple of days it wasn't raining.
Yeah, that's about right. That's and I obviously I have a lovely portable LED light as an actor, so I wanted to make it look like it was beautiful sunshine, but actually it's just a little LED portable light. Anyway, magic.
All right.
Yeah, cool. Thank you so much, guys. And apologies I can't stay for the whole thing, but I'm sure Andy will reveal all.
Well, thanks for.
Cool. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks for the chat and
telling us
about your end, Moj. We'll see you later.
See you, Andy. See you guys.
That just reminds me, I forgot to set up my light. Let me get that in place. There we go. Do I look a bit more beautiful now, Andy?
Gorgeous now.
All right. Now, it was interesting talking to Moj there, because initially I was getting the sense just reading about makeup that I was thinking, oh yeah, we've got a person here with another identity, and they can't tell who is who. So I was thinking there was a bit more parallels to Batman, but from what Moj was saying, I feel like this has a bit more in common with the recent Joker movie. So
probably
is Lady Christina more of a Batman or a Joker?
That's an interesting question. And I must admit, I haven't seen the last Joker movie, and just trying to work out, where his different identities come in.
Well, to be honest, you're not missing out on much, but it's much more about the man behind the makeup than just being the clown prince of crime, and trying to reconcile a lot of identity problems and place in the world, and a lot of father issues in that one as well.
Yeah, and I think with Lady Christina, it's the vehicle where Chris Laneghan has sort of worked out his identity, growing up in a background where you don't feel like you can be who you are, and that sort of escape where you can discover your personality and so sort of play out the different parts of yourself and find out what you really like about yourself and how you can kind of push the limits of who you are. But also, in a sense, you're kind of pushing against what people are trying to make you. So you get, I think, that sort of idea that when he's first gone on the stage as Lady Christina years ago, it's a weird kind of every sort of thing that he's seen, experimenting and trying to find out what he's actually happy with. And over the first few years then of being Lady Christina, gradually he's kind of forged this identity to think, this is me. This is Lady Christina. This is Chris Laneghan. This is what I'm happy doing. This is how I talk. This is how I am with people. And as the years have gone on, as you've got kind of Drag Race, you've got a lot of other things, social media, everything else, it's that sort of feeling that, well, this was my identity, but now other people are saying to me, you're a drag artist, so you've got to do lip sync. You're a drag artist, so you've got to do this, you've got to do that. And feeling that other people are kind of trying to take over your identity again and push you into a different way. So when we meet Lady Christina in the play, she's sort of getting pulled between those two kind of things. Doesn't want to be the person that audiences want a drag queen to be, but at the same point in time, if she looks and thinks, right, let's go back to being Chris, she doesn't want to be who Chris was, because the last time she really knew Chris, that was when he was the kid who was very nervous about being around his dad, very nervous about coming out, very nervous about anything that was going on in his life.
Yeah, so that as much as he feels like maybe he's grown out of Lady Christine, doesn't want to be Lady Christine anymore, there is that familiarity there. Yeah,
and I think the thing is that he wants to be Lady Christina, but he wants to be the Lady Christina that he's created, and what he hasn't sort of realised. Yeah, and I think what the problem that he finds at the start of the play, and that he hasn't sort of realised, that she hasn't realised, is that what Lady Christina, the reason why he's kind of falling out with Lady Christina, is almost in a sense that Lady Christina is being claimed from him, and I think that's where you get that sort of thing of people adopt a false identity, and we see a person on TV, and gradually as that sort of persona becomes famous, everyone confuses the persona with the person, and you kind of want to project your own world onto them. You want them to be what you want them to be rather than what they want to be. And he's got that kind of battle going on that he hasn't realised, that almost that he's been pleasing an audience, if you like, but by pleasing this audience, he's not actually pleasing himself. He's getting more dissatisfied with the character he's presenting. And a lot within the play is then about kind of coming back to realising, well, yeah, this is who I am. This is why I'm doing it. I'm not doing this for a TV audience. I'm not doing this to get onto Drag Race. I'm doing this because this is what my childhood, my sort of teen years, etc., what it's brought me to. This is what made me the person that I am, and kind of reclaiming his identity through it.
Yeah, I suppose it's the with the growing popularity of things like Drag Race and what people see on there, that then people build up an expectation of what a drag queen should be from that show. Whereas in this one, that Chris has been Lady Christina for 20 years, the drag scene was his chance to get away from who he was and express himself on his own terms, and now it feels like people have come back to try and impose their idea of what he should be back on him, but in the space where he felt most comfortable and felt like was his to operate in.
Yeah, very much so. So he feels that his identity, he's fought hard to get his identity through drag, and then now he's feeling that other people are trying to take his identity away from him. And I think with some of the research I was doing for the play and looking at things around Drag Race and the debate that goes on both sides of the argument about it, there is this kind of feeling from a lot of what we would sort of refer to as old school drag artists that something around drag is getting lost with Drag Race. It's fair to say there's a lot of other arguments on the other side of the coin as well about what it's done. But there is with some people kind of feeling that an idea almost that drag is becoming 24/7, and what's gone into the characters when we see them on Drag Race doesn't really kind of always come through. There was another program that was on the UK last year, which is basically it's sort of like drag coach trip, where a group of drag artists go into different towns across the UK and encourage people to come and do drag for a day. And it's very good with what they're doing about the issues that they're helping people to explore. But at the same point in time, what they had was the drag queens would sort of get up in the morning, get on their drag coach, drive across the country, always made up. And there's something in that way you're thinking, well, yeah, it's not this sort of 24/7. Actually, it's only really you put the thing on for the camera. Behind that, you're a different person. And there's a lot of different things that will have gone into making that drag persona that we don't actually see. So with the play, wanted to sort of explore a bit more about who is the character behind the makeup, who is the person that you're actually watching on the stage, what's all the things that have gone into creating that character.
Yeah, it's like almost ties into the whole Instagram aesthetic now, that you see such a curated version of these people and you think that that's what their life is like all the time, and that then you feel like the expectation is for you to do the same. And that, sure, there might be some people who are in drag 24/7 and that's their whole thing, but for a lot of people that's just not realistic. They have a life, and drag is something they do occasionally as maybe a bit of a release. But of course we only see on TV and that the most extreme versions of drag, and people who have the time and the capacity to do the most elaborate versions of it. And then, especially for something like drag, a scene that has such a glamorous aesthetic, that then becomes the expectation.
Yeah, you get that. Yeah, it's expected that there's always a glamour around it, and that people are always in that. So, as you say, almost people think you can never be Joe Bloggs, who works in his local supermarket or anything like that. But actually, that's often what people are doing, because you'll get the big stars of drag, but then for a lot of things, and historically, most drag artists have never really made much money. They're basically it's basically the same as so many people that are in theatre.
There's not anything. That much. It's like as soon as a metal band has made money, they're a sellout. And maybe that's what we're sort of alluding to, that especially with things like Drag Race out there now, becoming a drag queen is more of an actual viable career. And maybe there's more people out there now in it for the money than the love of the drag.
Yeah, and I think, in it for the money rather than the love of the drag, and in it because they've kind of created, in some instances, creating the persona specifically for the chance to be on Drag Race, or the chance to kind of get famous from it. Because a couple of people that I spoke to when I was sort of researching the play pretty much fell into that category. And then you talk to other people who would be saying about the reasons I went into drag were things around kind of feeling bullied at school, feeling like I was an outsider, feeling like I couldn't be who I wanted to be. If I walked down the street, if I tried to kind of dress up down the street, I'd be abused. If I went into places, you'd get kind of, I don't know, all the hard kids at school would like look and think, well, why are you like that? And almost it became, for some people, as a way of where you escape from what life's doing to you. And if you happen to then find success as a drag artist, it was a bonus. It was an incidental thing. It wasn't necessarily the thing that people wasn't the thing that people were going into that to do. And in some instances now people are doing that. And I think it's interesting how then that's creating a persona as opposed to the persona being born from out of your experiences. So there's that difference, I think, in some instances between the people that we see on some of the people we see on Drag Race, some of the other people we see on Drag Race, some of the people that do drag, some of the other people that do drag. And it is that kind of divide in some respects between the old school drag artists and new drag artists.
Yeah, one thing I find interesting about drag is, like you're talking about, how it's something where it becomes more acceptable for people. Is like one thing that I saw at a bit more of like a pub down here is how it was like on Wednesdays they'd have like the classic Pot and Palmer, and then there was also just a show hosted by a drag queen. It's almost like if you saw someone dressing up like that normally, like they'd be drawing looks and attention, but you give them a microphone and a stage in any capacity, then it becomes this whole character and show, and suddenly sometimes even the most conservatively minded people can just get in on the fun.
Yeah, and that's sort of, again, it's another thing that we touch on in the play, where he's just come off the stage, where Lady Christina's just come off the stage and is thinking about who the audience is that they've got now, and how a lot of the audience, it's straight, it's the metrosexual couples, it's the blokes that are kind of coming along and saying, look at me, love, I'm comfortable watching this, I'm comfortable with my sexuality. And yet with some of those people in that audience would probably feel it's their sort of relationship with it, where they're seeing it on a stage. And if they're seeing it not on a stage, what the different sort of attitudes are around it. Because it is interesting, I think, audiences that you get at drag shows, how that dynamic has changed and how it's perceived. But at the same point in time, how, as you say, how we kind of will look at that same drag act, if they're walking down the street, how does that change the way that we perceive people from when we're seeing them on a stage and doing a show? Yeah,
that if they realise that maybe for some people it isn't just a performance, and you remove that barrier of the stage, because that's quite often what it can be. That sometimes people can feel safer watching something in a performance because you've got the stage over here, that's where the performer is, the audience is over there, and there's a bit of that unspoken contract that those two don't actually cross over. But when it does, that's when maybe people would feel a bit more threatened about someone expressing themselves a little bit differently like that.
Yeah, and it's where again, with performers, how you can feel comfortable on a stage and in an identity that you've created, and feel very different when you're off a stage, that you wouldn't want to be, that you wouldn't present the same kind of character off stage. And I mean, if you think about, I suppose, comedians like Robin Williams always have very much, you've got the hyperactive stage persona, which we know kind of hid a lot of things that were going on behind the scenes. But the stage persona that he did, brilliant comedian and an absolute genius, but you realise kind of what's going on underneath the surface from that. And even when you think about, I always remember reading an interview, I think with Rowan Atkinson, where it's actually the interviewer, you kind of think at the end of it, well, did you not realise that? Because the interview's coming away and saying, really, he wasn't anywhere near as funny as he was on stage. And you think, well, that's because he's playing a part on stage. He's creating characters and he's got the freedom to do whatever he wants. When he's off the stage, he's back to being Rowan. He hasn't got the characters that he can kind of play with. And you're just back to the person, and it's a different setup. People aren't who they present themselves to be on stage, and often the stage personas are an escape for us. We can adopt different personalities, again, with social media, with Instagram, with Facebook, with everything else. We can kind of almost become who we want to be, free of anyone knowing us, and free of really having to have big conversations. But once we're off stage talking to our friends, people that we've grown up with, or just anyone for a long period of time, suddenly we don't have that image to hide behind. We're back to who we really are. And it always sort of fascinates me, the people that we all tend to think that the person that we're seeing on the stage is who that person is in real life, rather than an exaggerated version, an imagined version, or any other kind of version that might be.
Yeah, and like I've experienced a little bit the same, with the little bit of performing that I've done. That, of course, when I get up on stage and I do stuff, even if I'm playing myself, it's a character version of myself. And like there was one stand-up bit I did where I just go up to one of the random women in the audience, and as part of the bit, I ask her if she's ever been puke fucked before. That you can't do that just as a regular person. It's just not sustainable, and you'd hate being around someone like that. But in that 5 minutes that you get on stage as part of a bit, that it can be a good bit of fun. And it's just, especially for something like drag, like who would have the energy to maintain that all the time? Like, imagine any time you had to leave the house, you had to put on a wig and a dress and all the makeup and everything. That it's like, fuck, you can't afford.
And it's like
those
you can't afford to do.
Yeah, sorry, just those James Charles palettes are expensive.
Yeah, and it's like, I think, because it's interesting you're talking about when you're doing stand-up and what you can say to audience and what audience will take from it that you couldn't do outside of it. Within that theatre environment, there's a contract between you, the performer, and the audience. It's kind of, they know what they're coming in for, they know what to expect, you know what you can do, but it operates on different boundaries in a lot of extent from being outside. Because it is that contract, So I think if people have bought their ticket to know what they're getting, there's limits still to what you can do, but there's a certain kind of acceptance around it that you're into a different world on that.
Yeah, and like one thing I think with drag is like a real big part of the fun with it is how like bitchy and mean they can be, and part of that is because they're playing a character where that can be a bit of a release, and it's like, well, if they were like that all the time, it really just takes the fun out of it.
Yeah, and it gives that kind of escape, and it gives an escape for audiences as well, because, and if thinking about kind of where the plays come from originally, and with the drag artist, it's because of like Moj is playing a character that's been doing drag for about sort of 20 years and has grown up within family from the Midlands. So he would have been sort of born around mid-1970s. And you look at kind of where drag was, what the attitudes were, and sort of the history of it. You have this world where it's sort of, I suppose, influenced by things like, do you get Coronation Street in Australia?
That's more like a spot where there's a lot of theatres or something, right? Or...
No, so Coronation Street is like the UK's kind of longest running soap. Been going since the 1960s.
That's
but the
right.
guy who wrote that, a guy called Tony Warren, who came up with the original idea from it, a lot of what he's put in and a lot of where people come back because of sort of Tony Warren's background, what he was, sort of the early episodes of Coronation Street, we touch on this in the play, almost every character within that could almost be a kind of northern drag queen. He's got some very strong female characters, but it's written from a sort of a gay male perspective in how he's looking at them. And it's a very kind of affectionate tribute in a way to what the people were at that time and how they lived. But you create kind of bolder versions of them. And I think that's where a lot of drag acts kind of come from, or certainly the sort of the old school drag is that thing of they can say whatever they want to say. They can be bitchy. They can take the mickey out of anyone, and they have a certain license to do that. And people I think, identify with that, because in a sense that drag person, the drag persona, has the ability to say things that we would all like to say but don't feel we can. We don't have the confidence to say it. You know, we don't feel that we can be as catty because we're all thinking about, oh no, that might offend someone. These are the social sort of mores that go along with it. Whereas they have the ability just to kind of to let loose with it. And it's very funny. It's that kind of, it's almost like a kind of safety valve that they can burst it open for people and become that bit of, now I'm going to say everything you think, but wouldn't really feel that you can say. And we can identify with that, which I think is a great thing about it. And there's a whole load of kind of other traditions, I think, where we think about sort of pantomime dames and things like that, of all of these things that within the background of the time that Christina was growing up in, what would have been on the TV, how drag, female impersonators, homosexuals would have been thought of by people. You know, it was a very different time from what it is now. And one of the things with the play is really then exploring that and thinking about how that shaped what Chris's dad was, how that shaped how he thought, how he treated Chris, how it shaped how Chris could be growing up within that environment. Within the character, he's come from a background where his dad is second generation Irish. And in 1970s, there was Birmingham pub bombings when the IRA, Irish Republican Army, bombed pubs in Birmingham. That created a lot of anti-Irish sentiment for quite a while. And it's at that point in time that Chris was born. With his dad, there's the idea around a second generation Irish feeling some ways of trying to kind of distance himself from that, but how other people would have thought of that. And the discrimination Irish people would have felt, the discrimination a lot of ethnic minorities would have felt again at that point in time, and the discrimination that homosexuals would have felt, and the kind of the stereotyped image of it all, and how that all comes together to inform who Chris's dad was, how he reacted generally in life, how that affected Chris's mom, how that affected Chris growing up, and how all of that starts to pour into what his character could be. And we also explore other bits of the history around it. So in the UK, in 1988, I think it came in, was a thing called Clause 28, which banned any sort of teaching or promotion in school of anything that might have been seen to have been endorsing homosexuality. And it was a big thing then, because it was something that was kind of grossly unfair and was censoring so much more and created this sort of atmosphere. Well, then if anyone wasn't sure of their sexuality in school, you'd be very worried about whether you could say anything. Teachers would be very worried if you went to them and asked them about it. Could they say anything to you, or would they risk falling foul of Clause 28 from it? So there was this very sort of closed off environment where prejudice, homophobia came with a kind of a government seal of approval from it, almost from the Thatcher government at the time. And Chris would have been 14, coming 15 at the time when that was happening. So that would be really the time where he was starting to question his own sexuality. And growing up with a father who was very much the heterosexual male, who together with his friends in the factory, in the offices, etc., would find, laughing at queers would be one of his biggest forms of jokes. So you've got that on one side of it. You've got on the other side how people at school, how other kids at school might have treated someone who they saw as different. And then you've also got the inability to be able to ask teachers about it, because teachers are having to think about, I might normally have wanted to talk to this person and help them, but now I'm worried that if I say something And if it gets back to their parents, that their parents might complain that this is a teacher that's promoting homosexuality. So you have all of that was going on around that time, and all of that we've sort of worked into the backstory for not only for Chris, but for the whole sort of range of characters that come in at different points in this play.
Yeah, the problem there is that when homosexuality becomes something that can't be talked about at school, that your parents are laughing at, that it then just becomes coded as wrong. And so then you as a kid growing up, that if you make that realization that you're gay, that then you caught up with the sense of identity of being like that, well, I don't want to be gay, and you feel like that there's something wrong with you. And then because no one's allowed to talk about it, you can't get advice from anyone around who you are, and get hear those words of that it's fine, that it's just part of you, who you are, and there's nothing wrong with you.
Yeah, and it opens you up to a lot more doubts and questions, because the absence of having anyone that you can really talk to it's a big thing, because there's no one to help you work things through. There's no one to sort of help you feel that actually you're not a freak, you're not unusual. There's other people, but you don't know how many other people there are around you. You don't know what that community is. So yeah, it's a very tricky thing, and I think we look as well in the play at the thing late 1990s, the Admiral Duncan Pub in London, which was gay bar that there was a bomb that was planted in there by someone really with a very homophobic agenda from it. But within a few people died, a lot of people got injured, and stories of it at the time where people were more worried about admitting to their parents that they were in that pub than having to say to their parents, I've lost an arm, I've lost a leg. It was more about, and when I say I've lost an arm or I've lost a leg, how did you lose your arm or lose a leg? Well, I was in that pub that got bombed. You mean you were in the gay pub?
Yeah, it becomes, they're worried about the explanation of what happened rather than so much what actually happened itself. And
yeah, and it's
for such a case of grievous bodily harm, that for you to be more worried about explaining how you lost the arm rather than the fact that you lost an arm shows how severe the problem was.
Yeah, absolutely, and it shows just how, even at that time where we kind of think, right, well, things have moved on from the 80s, things have moved on from the 70s, but it shows a lot about what the prejudices, underlying assumptions still in place then, and to an extent, again, I think still in place now. There's a lot that's changed, but there is a feeling that, and certainly when we look at things like sort of Trump and people like that, legitimizing this sort of agenda of let's not be tolerant about people that are different from us. Let's present this image of kind of the white male and what that represents. And there's worrying resurgences all over the place, I think, where we can see that coming back. And almost anything that's been, any advances that are made, help in some ways almost to sort of fuel an anti-agenda. So when gay marriages are legalized, you see how then people suddenly spring out and say, oh, well, this is disgusting, it's an offense, it's an abuse of religion, it's sinning and everything else from it. So they're sort of taking advances and using that in a sense to then sort of fuel their own agenda. So I think for every kind of big advance that's been made, for every step towards having a more tolerant society, having a society where actually we realize that it's not a case of kind of tolerance, it's just accepting that everyone has the right to be what they are. With every step towards that, we seem to have a slight sort of another side of it at the moment of people reacting against that and almost saying, fueling their own arguments, whether that's anti whatever they want to be at that point in time.
Yeah, and especially for something like that, it almost comes back to the whole thing of if you've got two consensual adults, no matter who they are, if they're just vibing and not hurting anyone else, what's the big deal?
Yeah, if two people are doing something fully consensual that they're happy about, they're not harming anyone else. What right does anyone else have to judge them, to comment on them?
And a lot of the people that preach more those conservative family values, like your Prime Minister over there at the moment, is someone who on his Wikipedia page is described as having 5 or 6 kids. And that's usually the people who espouse these things trying to impose ways of lives onto other people, have a fair bit of dirty laundry themselves, and they're usually advocating for personal freedom in a lot of other areas.
Yeah, our Prime Minister. He's not my Prime Minister. He just happens to be in the country that I live in. Our Prime Minister is a very interesting character. He was actually one of the things with the last play that we did before Makeup, was a play called A Beginner's Guide to Populism. He was one of the inspirations behind that, because that was a play that was written shortly after Brexit and Trump's election, and was set in this kind of village that didn't want to become part of a city, as a way of initially satirizing the attitudes.
I read about that Brexit one, and that was it could very quickly pick up on the themes there for that one. And that's sort of something else I wanted to talk to you about, is No Logo Productions sort of broader as a whole. So I'm quite interested in this Beginner's Guide to Populism. So it was sort of like a bit of an analogy for Brexit.
Yeah, started as an analogy to Brexit. It weirdly then ended up accurately predicting Boris Johnson's rise to power, because what you get in the play is, as the village has found out it's going to be part of a garden city, there's a current sort of would-be MP for that constituency who backs the cause, female who backs the cause, even though they don't necessarily believe it, but they think it will help their party regain power, which, as we sort of realised afterwards, that was pretty much Theresa May. But then as they go forward, the local village loudmouth, who everyone's laughed at previously and thought largely irrelevant, gradually then initially becomes the acolyte of the current leader, but gradually takes power and pursues their own agenda until by the end of the play they've had a vote of no confidence, which has largely been a group of people in a village hall shouting, "Oi, yes, we agree," and have then taken the sort of the current leader, deposed her, and are then heading the village into a place where they're not trading with anyone, where the village has been rejected by the towns and cities around them, and where they're basically kind of heading down the path where Boris Johnson's potentially taking Britain at the moment. And at that same point in time, the village idiot has now become the leader. And so we realised almost when Boris Johnson got the Tory party leadership, suddenly you realise, this play wasn't about Brexit. This play was foreshadowing the Tory party election campaigns.
Well, as a lot of the podcasts that I listen to say, that I think the reason why you're able to predict that is that at the moment, history seems to favour the most stupid and hilarious outcomes, and especially for the whole thing with how Boris Johnson rose to power, that it was definitely a real worst case scenario. So that's just why it had to be that way.
Yeah, it gets harder to do satire now, because when you just have leaders, politicians all over the place that appear to be caricatures of anything that you could ever expect a politician to be, you sort of think, how can you satirize something that's already being pushed to those extremes? And if we did a beginner's guide to populism now, you'd have to sort of think, at the time when we did it, it seemed to be pushing things further. People said about the end of the play, well, that's good, but I don't know as it's really, you may be pushing things too far. It's never going to get like that, is it? And then you think a couple of years later, well, it has done. How could we make something more extreme than the reality now is a challenge if you're trying to write something satirical.
Yeah, and it'd be that as things go on, you probably realise that, oh no, we didn't go far enough with the ending. That the only thing I can think is you'd almost have to do something like a one of those sort of dystopia style stories where it's not so much a twist, but you realise at the end that all these harsh living conditions are almost self-imposed because they're trying to prove a point. Like that's the only way I feel like you could do something that's got the degree of farce and exaggeration that could actually play up what's happening at the moment.
Yeah, it's look, trying to find, I suppose, a unique angle on it, on what you can do now to play it up and shed a light back onto people of almost this is going on. So you may be sort of moving away, if you like, from the sort of from the Orwells of this world of thinking we're projecting forward to future dystopia. I think, as you say, it's kind of thinking, no, what we're doing is telling you that dystopia is here now. This is the world that you're living in.
The only other thing I can think of, and probably be more of a Trump response, as relevant as that is now, is you need to almost have a show like The Thick of It, where you have, but instead of the whole joke being that the main people you're following are very incompetent and have aren't very good at their jobs, it would have to be that the people you follow are the professionals, but they're following the orders of someone who's completely ridiculous. So how do you enact things when the rules are changing all the time, or you have to sell to people, like a policy that is harmful and that there's really no good way to spin? That's the only other thing I can think of. But yeah, it's become very difficult to play up how ridiculous things are when reality often outweighs anything that would be conceivable in fiction.
Yeah, definitely. Truth has become stranger than fiction.
And it seems like it's quite a dynamic range that you guys are doing there at No Logo, that you've got the quite farcical Beginner's Guide to Populism. Now you've got the very intimate Lady Christine. They feel like sort of two ends of the spectrum when it comes to performances.
They are in a lot of respects, I think, and across the plays that we've done over the years, there's a mixture of things that are, I suppose, the personal sides and the political sides of things. So we did another play called Boxes that was about sort of housing crisis and where the money for London property boom was coming in, which was very much on the sort of political side. And then we did a thing called After We Danced that was really a kind of a love story that spans 6 generations. So that was very much more on the personal side. And my writing tends to go between the two. It's always, a lot of the time, it's about sort of what interests me, what things I've heard about, read about, and I think that's something that's worth exploring. And it does fall into 2 camps. Maybe if I could actually just decide to settle on one of them, that might be a good way to go. But always tend to feel, well, if there's something that's interesting to me, let's explore it. Let's see what the best vehicle is from it. There's some, I think, connections across them, although Beginner's Guide and Makeup are very different plays. There's still always something about trying to explore society within that and finding the right vehicle to explore society and to explore issues from it. So with a play like Beginner's Guide, it's looking very much from the outside of thinking, well, what's going on? Let's observe this world around us. With a play like Makeup, it's taking issues, but it's thinking, well, let's explore it from the inside of it. Let's go really actually into the character that we're seeing, and let's have the world, how it's affected them, and the world, how they see them. So there is those connections, but yeah, we swing very much from a mixture of, say, so personal and political, and then comedy, farce, satire, to more serious plays. And I think I personally like doing that because I think you don't want to end up almost doing every play just being a rewrite of the play that you've done before.
And it's a good palate cleanse to alternate between them.
Yeah, definitely. It's like kind of, I think sometimes like Shakespeare knew that within his tragedies. Within every tragedy, you'll eventually get a breakaway for a kind of, here's the comic scene that plays out on it. And I think that's the same for writers. You can't kind of continually write comedy without wanting to sometimes do something that's more serious, that's heavier. You can't continually want to write drama or serious heavyweight drama without sometimes thinking, yeah, let's throw in a knob gag in this. There's always that kind of compulsion to go to another extreme from it, to try something different out.
Yeah, and even those more serious works, you need some comic relief to let off the tension. And even then, that in the more comedic stuff, that it does need to have some heart and some character to pull people along.
Yeah, definitely. We always try to get. There's another play that we did called Casual Encounters, that was, with the premise of it was around wife swapping, and a couple who had started doing wife swapping, but then invite a couple in who are basically there to rob the house because they know it's a perfect middle class crime, because no one's going to want to ring up the police and say, yeah, the house has been broken into. Really? Well, what happened? How did the stuff go? Well, we had some people coming round for a wife swapping session and they've stolen everything. So they knew that they could kind of get away with that. And it's very much, that play was very much farce and comedy, but we wanted to touch on issues then around how we can all start to think about our home and our secure environment and locking the doors and keeping neighbours out and all of the double standards that go on. So even within that, again, as another sort of comedy farce play, you're exploring issues around that and having something that's hopefully got more substance behind it, that people can come away and think, yeah, I've enjoyed that play, I've laughed a lot about this play, but I'm also going to be thinking about some of the things that are in it, which I think is a good thing. Again, it's always a good thing to do. Again, with Beginner's Guide to Populism, a lot of it was very funny. It gets into very much darker places as it goes along, and the aim with that was to get people laughing very much at the start of it, and then to come out and thinking, crap, yeah, I thought that was funny, but I'm laughing at what's sort of happening now. And now I've seen this nightmare version of where it's heading to. So playing around with comedy in that way as well is something I think is worth doing a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think that's something that stops comedy from aging and sort of losing touch over time. Is if it has a good heart and a good message in it, then it can still resonate. And usually that's then a good guiding principle for the sorts of jokes you include in there as you're writing it.
Yeah,
that it's like with that premise of robbing middle class people, that punching up is always funny, and that you write the characters in the right sort of way, and despite what's happening to them, being unfortunate, that you can do it in a way where the audience still feels like that they still kind of deserve it.
Yeah, you want the audience to kind of have a sympathy with them. And you want the audience as well to think, yeah, well, maybe they let themselves in for it. It was an interesting one with that. I won't mention the town that we did it in, but in one of the places where we put the play on, we had a lot of laughs going through the play, first of all. And then there's one comment in it about, I think, sort of bored suburban couples looking to spice up their love lives. And suddenly the audience went quiet from it. And we thought, woo, we've come into Swinger City here, and we've touched a nerve with so many people that are in this audience. And that was kind of interesting, where you think about now people have identified with the character and have suddenly feeling quite a bit uncomfortable with recognizing themselves in it, which was an interesting thing to experience.
Yeah, and that then things maybe things get a little bit too real for people. But maybe that joke or that line would have gone quite well in other areas where it's not feeling like such an attack.
Yeah. So the things about, I think a few comedians, I've seen Stuart Lee, a brilliant comedian, what he said about a lot of the stuff that he does, that you can do different lines in different places and you get totally different reactions from them, depending around whether you're in the place where the people are coming from or whether you're talking about a place that other people are from, and all around those kind of perceptions of how we see things, which it's so fascinating how different lines play out with different audiences.
Yeah, and so what? Well, I guess we've already covered sort of some of the themes that you'd be going over in Makeup, haven't we? Where it is a lot more introspective, and it's a lot more about personal identity and how others perceive you. So, yeah. I was thinking that you can't see the stream of what I was playing, but I have just died, so I thought that would be a good opportunity that I'll bring up the actual event listing for you there on screen. And so I've got here the event page for Makeup and the times that you guys are on. It's in the description. Is there anything else you'd want to mention whilst I've got you here on stream?
Other than to say, it's a fantastic play. Please come along and see it. What we've also got as well, when you see the play, at the end of the play, what comes up is the thing about Makeup, the backstage area. So after you watch the play, you can go on to another part on our website where we've got a lot more kind of information from it. There's the Q&A that Moj was talking about earlier that's on there. There's a lot of kind of background stuff to where all of the characters, so sort of Lady Christina, Chris, his dad, his mom, all of their kind of sort of little histories around that. More videos, more clips of stuff, which is a great extra bit that we've done from it. So that's really kind of, I think, probably the only other things I'd add from it. I'd just say kind of it's a play, I think, we like to think it's a great play. So we hope, if you're sort of umming and ahhing about it, give it a go. It's pay whatever you want. So if you watch it and decide at the end you really hate it, you might have lost an hour of your life, but you haven't lost any of your money. So it's worth giving a go, I think.
And that's the biggest thing now, that it's not like you have to actually put on clothes and go somewhere and find parking and then have to pay for it to then pay for the ticket to go to the thing. It's just right there at home, so you can go and do it.
Yeah, and it's great that it's it's always the weird thing, as we touched on earlier, about kind of we've had the money to for making the short film and everything else that's happened because of lockdown, but it's a weird things with it that we've got the play on to Melbourne Fringe, we've had the play seen in San Francisco, things that wouldn't have happened had lockdown not gone on. And it's brilliant how the sort of creative community and smaller parts of the creative community have really responded to it. The San Francisco festival that we did, a thing called Marsh Stream, which was out of theatre that's been running for years, called the Marsh in San Francisco. They started doing a streaming thing, had a guy who watched one show who was from Scotland, and the organizer then thought, wow, we've got a big audience, let's put a festival on. And we answered the call out for that, got into that. So we think, they would have never done this. We would have never been involved in it had it not been for that. But, you have a festival that's seen by around about 3,000 people have watched different shows in that festival, either at the time or live. And now in Melbourne, it's always been one of those fringe festivals that you go at Edinburgh, and they always have an event, where you're getting, here's other fringe shows that you can do, here's other fringe festivals, and you always think, I'd love to do Melbourne, and then you get into the sort of the finance of it, and you think that's impossible. And then this time round, it suddenly is possible to get plays on, and to hopefully get people seeing them, which is fantastic. And people don't have to put their trousers on, don't have to put anything on. And they can sit and watch it, which is absolutely brilliant. All I would say is, if you're watching it outdoors, preferably then still put clothes on.
Yeah, that depending on where you are, trousers are optional, but sometimes preferred.
Yeah, there's still certain levels of social etiquette that people have to follow.
And it's good that like Australia is quite geographically inconvenient for a lot of things. And that this is the sort of show that we wouldn't have gotten here if it wasn't for COVID, because especially just even for two of you to come down here for the duration of the festival is just financially prohibitive. So it's good that we get the opportunity to see something like this, and I feel like something that's so distinctly and purposely set in the UK that we wouldn't have gotten that if someone tried to do it here, or even if someone grew up in that period and then tried to write something living here in Melbourne with more of the capacity to put something on at the Melbourne Fringe. So even though it's like the UK, Australia, quite similar, there are those smaller cultural differences, and those are the things that you may not even pick up on, but would really stand out to an Australian watching this play.
Yeah, those differences, because when I've seen Australian performers in Edinburgh, you notice different things there, different sort of cultural references, and I guess there's always going to be the same things. There's going to be that same thing when you're watching something in Australia that's very much set in England. There's certain cultural references and cultural differences from it that would always kind of be noticeable. And as you say, there is that difficulty though normally as well of just actually the logistics of the funding and everything to bring a play, and then you're worrying about what the audience might be, whether you're ever going to get any of your money back if you're doing that. Whereas this time round, and the Melbourne Fringe have been absolutely fantastic, because we only found out really about the Fringe about a week and a half before it was due to start. So we'd had the film that we made for San Francisco. Then when we saw, we're still in time to enter Melbourne Fringe, they're still looking for stuff. We put it in, put the details, and they sort of turned it around, got it online for the launch of the festival within about 3 or 4 days. And I think everything they've done with digital is fantastic, to really think about how can we create a great environment that not just going to be kind of people just watching things at home where they could, as an alternative to Netflix. It's actually, let's try and create a theatre performance, which is the other thing that we've tried to do, I suppose, with Makeup, is it's filmed as a straight show. So it's just literally, we filmed it in a theatre, etc. Theatre in Camden, one camera focusing on the stage all the way through to get a really kind of intimate shot, so that you're seeing it exactly as you would see it in a theatre. You're seeing the live performance. You're not seeing some kind of fancy version with edits, because I think that way it really kind of creates the intimacy and fitting in with what we think Fringe theatre at home really ought to be, is to think about, let's give people what they would have been seeing. Let's not do kind of Netflix light, or let's not do big art house productions. Let's try and actually keep Fringe show in a digital format that people can see. And I think everything that Melbourne have been doing with the Fringe as well is just fantastic, because it all kind of pushes down to that thing of, let's give people a Fringe show that they don't have to leave the house for. Yeah,
and I think the decision you made to shoot it more like you're watching at the theatre is a good choice as well. That it then, you can capture some of that feel where it's as if you got the best seat in the house. And even some of the things like the space and the quieter parts of watching a show, that usually gets cut out when it's edited more professionally, but that can help to feed into the atmosphere and really does help give that sense that you're actually watching something being performed.
Yeah, and you can get those kind of, because we haven't done, because obviously you're not getting the kind of real, let's suddenly zoom in and get that intimate close-up that you'd get on TV, because you're doing it from that perspective of what would you see if you're in an audience.
And it's about like the acting then, about like Moj's ability to carry an entire show by himself. You don't have the net of editing to tell you what to focus on and how to feel.
Yeah, and so you feel, I think you watch the play and you feel like you're in an intimate setting. You're watching that person, you're watching that character. You're not, you're watching Lady Christina. You're not watching a play, you're not watching a performance. You're in the room with the person. And with that single shot, it does mean that you're there. Whereas I think if you're doing multi-cutaways and everything else, you're watching an edited version of something. And we wanted to get that idea that you're watching the real person, that this is Lady Christina. coming off the stage at the end of what could be her last ever show and going through all of the things that have led her there. And you're really in her mind and you're not leaving her mind until she ends the show.
Yeah. Well, I feel like that's a good point to leave it there, because I know that over there, Andy, you're at the start of your day. You've got the rest of Friday ahead of you, whereas for me, it's all done and dusted, and I'll be going to bed after this. So I want to be mindful of your time, let you actually get on it. You know, smoke me a kipper, and I'll see you in the morning.
Yeah, brilliant. Take care, Tom. See you again.
See you later.